Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third episode of the Adult Learner's Journey, a UALI podcast where we explore the experiences of adult learners through adult learners' eyes, as well as the institutions that we're working with. So I'm excited to have today with us Joe and Allen, who are visiting us today from Chicago. Both working at two different institutions. I'm excited to have a conversation today about what the transfer process looks like and really what those transitions look like in the adult learners experience in Chicago. So I'd love to turn it over to both of you to introduce yourselves and maybe tell us a little bit more about the work that you do. And this is a special episode today because we have two folks from two different institutions. And if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing a little about your institution as well.
Hi, Jimmy. Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about Harold Washington College, which is the institution that I work at. For everyone's voice recognition, this is Joe. I am the Associate Dean of Career Programs at Harold Washington College, which is one of the 7 city colleges of Chicago. And in that role as the Associate Dean of Career Programs, I am working directly with our career services advisors. So we are the team that is primarily thinking about how students are preparing themselves for transition from Harold Washington College, which is a 2-year institution, associate degree granting, degrees and certificates, and into career fields. For many of those students, that transition into career does have the intermediary step of transferring to an institution like University of Illinois Chicago, which is where my colleague Allen is from. And we have the mindset of helping getting students ready for careers and what will come next. I also wear the hat of working with our student activities division, which means we're planning a lot of those student-facing events on campus and helping students just find a way to towards a sense of belonging and more community at our college.
Thank you so much. Allen, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Allen Womble. I am the Director of High Impact Student Engagement at UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago. And I also am now working with our Center for Student Involvement as well. With being over high impact student engagement, we look at the deep learning experiences that students have on campus, whether it's internships, leadership experiences, research with the faculty, et cetera, as a part of both their curricular experience, but also their co-curricular life. And so for us, we've worked with students in student activities, roles, et cetera. And we know that our transfer students, and particularly our adult learners, have oftentimes experience barriers in kind of accessing what the university has to offer, right? And so, we worked with our executive director of career services and our head of assessment on the core team for this project that we'll talk about. But really, it was born out of this notion of how do we, provide ease in our transfer students and our adult learners who are transfers to access the different resources and community building to really make their experience here at UIC the best that it could be. And, UIC is a Research One institution with 30,000 plus students. And so it can be a massive place, right? And so we're trying to make it a little bit smaller and digestible for those students.
Thank you. And I know I've had the chance to work with both of you through our Partnerships for Adult Learner Success, or our PALS grant. And I know you all are doing wonderful work, but I would love for you all to share a little more about that today with our listeners. But I think before we even get into that, I think it's important for us to understand a little bit more about the relationship that Harold Washington College and UIC have. So would you mind sharing a little bit more about what that relationship looks like, maybe how the process works to transfer between the institutions? And if you can, kind of focus too on, you spoke to this a little bit, Allen, about how that adult learner experience might be a little bit different than maybe more traditionally aged transfer students between your institutions or institutions in general.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off that conversation. I think that to think about the relationship between the institutions is a really interesting one, because we're no more than a mile or a mile and a half apart in distance. But often UIC to the City College system, and particularly Harold Washington, feels like that older sibling that we know we're in a relationship with, but we don't always know all the details about that relationship. When we hear students talk about transfer preferences, and this is inclusive of our adult learners, we know that UIC is a top choice for them to transfer. Something I didn't mention in my introduction is that Harold Washington College truly is reflective of Chicago's population. So this truly also means that we're thinking about a student population that's between 45 and 50% Latine, 30% Black, looking at starting at Harold Washington College and continuing their education at UIC. We're also a downtown campus. We are in the loop of Chicago. And so we're getting a lot of adult learners who might be working their 9 to 5 at a business in downtown Chicago, taking 1, 2, 4 classes at a time with us at Harold Washington College. Truly, though, with the mindset of, I'm going to do this so that I'll be prepared to transfer to UIC, for example. So, those students really are, increasingly coming into focus with us. I in career development work with our transfer center director, really in thinking about unique programming and just getting to know this student population better so that we understand more about their intent in going to our transfer partners.
And I would just add to Joe's point, I think what was important for us as we kind of dreamed about this project was Harold Washington is our largest feeder school for transfer students. And of course, that then means that most of our adult learners would come through Harold Washington. And so I agree, we know well of one another in terms of institutions. But I think the other exciting part about this program, our transfer center, at least up till most recently, because I think this is shifting a little bit, only had one person in it. And that person, of course, is saddled with the responsibilities of all of the transfer articulation process and helping the students work with the registrar's office, et cetera. There wasn't, in some spaces you'll see like a transfer student life type program, right? Where it's more about connecting the individual student with resources, easing their transition. She did some of that, certainly, because she's just a rock star, but it's hard to do that at large and at scale when it's just you. And so I know that we are, as an institution, adding more staff to that office. But when this project was conceived of, it was just an office of one. And so she's been, Trisha Fancy has been a great connection point and a great champion of this work. But we also knew, and I think she knew, what more can be done, is the way that we were looking at it. And so we chose Harold Washington, like I said, or begin the conversation with them really because, hey, you're already our largest feeder. So we know that there's some magic happening between our institutions. What can we do to create more of that?
Yeah, so I'm hearing kind of terminology, right? The project. So I'm gonna skip a little bit to have you tell us a little bit about what that is. Just some context for our listeners too. With the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, we are hosting this PALS grant, the Partnerships for Adult Learner Success grant, which is aiming to build partnerships within the cities and communities and universities that we work with. And you all are working on this actively, kind of as we speak. So, I'm going to pose a couple of questions here. Feel free to answer them in any order you want, but would love if you can tell us a little more about the program, the Professional Development and Leadership Program for the adult learners who are transferring between the institutions. how it's been going, what feedback you have from adult learners, what's working really well right now, what are some continued areas of exploration. So I'm just kind of posing all of that out there. Feel free to kind of bounce off of each other too. So, feel free to have a conversation about it. Would love to hear from both of your perspectives, since we are kind of having that 2-year college perspective as well as the 4-year. Would love to hear from both of you.
Sure. I guess I can hop off and start off this section. So the program, Professional Leadership Development Program, brings together adult learners, and we have these developmental sessions, some around kind of professional development skills like, job hunting for the seasoned professional, or translating your experience, like your lived experience. We try to find topics that are relevant to students and to the adult learners in the space that they're in. So I think one of the ones that we did that was pretty successful was transitioning careers, right? Because a lot of our adult learners are doing that. And so we had folks who've done that before on a panel moderated by Career Services, to really kind of dive deep into all of the bits and pieces of that. And then we also have leadership development pieces. We know leadership development for adult learners is different than what we would do for other students. And so we try to focus on topics like, for instance, one that came up in surveys was imposter syndrome. I don't feel like I should be here, I belong here. And so how do we combat that, but from an adult learner's lens? The project is going well. It's been a learning experience through and through. One of the things we learned the first year was students liked these sessions, but they also really wanted time to connect with each other too, right? And so we started a group me, and in our second iteration of the programming, we have a lot of just kind of community building things happening too. One of the things that we learned nationally is adult learners is a pseudonym for oftentimes students with parents, or students who are parents. And so we really launched into this conversation, and we're leading the division in some ways on the conversation of what types of services and support we should offer to our students who have children. And of course, how do we make our programming, particularly the programming that we want to bring our adult learners to in particular, or intentionally, how do we make that child friendly as well? And so we've done some of that. We have a good showing. What we're super excited about this year is we've launched the mentorship program aspect. So students who were active in the program last year have returned as mentors. I mean, everybody can be in the program, everybody can attend the sessions, et cetera. But then there's this other component of adult learners mentoring adult learners on how to navigate campus. One of the things we found was that the experience is nuanced, right? And it helps you to be able to connect with and build rapport with people who've been in your shoes before. And so we've been excited about that. Another cool thing that happened, and I want to bring Joe into this piece here. We had kind of a transition party almost, where some of our staff went to Harold Washington and met with, kind of did a rally with the students and the staff at Harold Washington, but students in particular who had committed to UIC. And I thought that that was a great handoff. And of course, that was the first year that we could implement that because it was the end of like year one. And certainly we got great feedback from the students and from our team who were there. And we certainly want to keep that as a good part of this program, the bridge, if you will, to hopefully continue to ease the transition for the students.
Yeah, I'd love to lift up a couple of things that Allen mentioned, and even going back to a previous comment, Allen said that a lot of times teams that are supporting adult learners, transfer students, whoever it might be, are teams of one in a lot of our institutions. So I'm talking to all of you out there who I feel the pain of, who are doing tons of work for lots of students with no support. Because I think that the partnership that we developed, I'll put it in, we are still developing via this opportunity, has highlighted that even if we're teams of one locally, there are people who we can partner with external to our institutions to help focus on particular student populations. So, we don't have any particular named focus on adult learners at Harold Washington College, but we know that we can do terrific warm handoffs to Allen, to Daniel, to Jean, to Sue, because we know people by name, we know people by reputation at UIC, and we know that that's going to create a nice transition for our adult learners. And I think it is a place of comfort to attack those ideas like imposter syndrome, or no one's going to understand that I'm a parent, or I'm parenting aging parents, which is also something we're seeing with a lot of our adult learners. But, just this opportunity to really unpack, spots that we didn't recognize with these students, childcare, of course, transportation, housing stressors, what kind of credit can I get for prior learning? This is just unpacking new ways of understanding and thinking for us about adult learners. How do I talk about my experience, even if it was 20 years ago? And so, I think sometimes you step back and say, wow, the great outcome for this, yes, is student outcomes, but it's also just the nuanced changes to our work that we can develop because we understand a student population better.
Great. So it sounds like there are a lot of like advising components to this as far as helping adult learners at Harold Washington kind of understand what that process is going to look like, what to transfer to UIC. I want to bring it to kind of the practical piece of this as well, how this looks in practice. So some questions I have, I'm wondering, it sounds like much of this is housed kind of at UIC with folks talking to future UIC students. But can you talk about where these sessions happen? Are they virtual? Are they in person? Are the UIC students the mentors to the Harold Washington? I'm wondering if you could paint some of that, the picture for us as well, and just thinking more about that context and what this looks like practically for your institutions and then maybe for others as well.
I think it's a great question. So we have learned, of course, that a hybrid approach is best. I think initially we did everything in person, and that is complicated. We kept trying to find dates and times that work, and we would get people out, but I think we kept hoping for a larger number of people to come out. And so we now have some virtual sessions. The session that I mentioned about transition in careers was a virtual session, and it was well attended. And so we, I think as a whole, have had to figure out what things are best for in person, what things are best for Zoom. And so we are abiding by those lessons. And we put both the developmental pieces in person and in Zoom, and the social pieces too. We found that was important. Yes, one would think that socially you'd want to get together in one room, but no, it was important to also have some social elements virtual too, so that students could connect and meet each other. Right now in its first year's iteration, the mentorship program is UIC student to UIC student. So just got here, adult learner being mentored by an adult learner who's been here for a little bit. But I do think that it would be cool to add in subsequent years, what would it look like to have a UIC student speak to a Harold Washington student who's articulated the desire to come to UIC, because I think that could help the transfer piece even more so, as we pull each other across the divide, so to speak. And of course, the other systemic piece is how do we minimize the divide as much as possible?
Yeah, I think that remains true for us as well. I'll talk a little bit about how we have thought about programming for adult learners at Harold Washington, and it's primarily been in a celebratory space. I think one of the things we learned from our colleagues at UIC is that students were expressing that they might really be looking for community, they might really be looking for connection. They might not be feeling it because they're trying to juggle so many things, so they're not feeling connected to maybe younger peers or older peers or even peer group of the same age. They're not feeling as connected to faculty and staff. And so that's the approach we've been taking, is just to say, we're going to create these spaces intentionally. Our best outcomes have been in person, in order to be in that celebratory mood, because we can feed them when we do that. So that's always a victory for us. But also just saying, what does it look like for you all to own a social space? Is this a student club? Is this just us opening a Zoom room and letting you connect and having some resource providers show up and just listen in and comment as you need us? So we've kind of taken this active/passive approach of just being there as needed and showing up and listening, but offering a resource as it's requested.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's very helpful to understand too. And I'm hearing a lot of future areas of exploration, as well as like really kind of research-backed experiences for adult learners and what makes sense. When I think about our institute here, UALI, it was developed in kind of this asynchronous plus synchronous plus some in-person ways, because we know that that's how folks learn better. And while that was discovered through the PALS project with adult learners, I think that a lot of these things that we're discovering and working with our older students is that a lot of the things that we're finding can end up helping all students. And I think that's really a special thing that's kind of come out of this. And I think that your project in particular is really emulating that. And two, another thing that I'm hearing too is that year by year, you came up with a plan and you were able to cycle through that for a year, identify what's working, what's not, and then start to think about how future iterations are going to continue to make it better, and really just launching, making something happen so that in that first year there are some positive changes for your students. So I've really appreciated hearing all this. I'm wondering too, kind of as we close out today, whether it's lessons learned or advice that you have for other institutions, especially our urban institutions that likely are in areas where there are opportunities for partnerships with other institutions, whether they're 2-year, 4-year, whatever the case may be. I'm wondering if you have any advice or some of those lessons learned for folks listening today that might have been inspired by some of the things that you've said.
Yeah, I think I'll start with going back to something I said earlier. I think moving into more of an online environment, moving into hybrid environments, a lot of us doing the work became quite insulated in that we just had to get the work done. So we turned towards our students. We tried to be as receptive as possible. We spent long days and sometimes long nights in online environments working with students, and forgot to turn towards partners, forgot to connect across institutions, started skipping those networking events where we might connect with someone who was doing similar work and learn with them. So I think that the PALS process and the project has really reminded us at Harold Washington College that we have peers in this work, that we have people who are, I don't want to say joined to us by necessity, but the students prove to us that this is a partnership that needs to be stronger and needs to be, worked on and just investigated. And we practitioners need to know each other better so that the students can know us better. And so I think, leaning into those spaces, whoever it is, whatever the work is you're doing, is where my takeaway has been as we just continue to work. But the door is open now, so, we won't close it.
I so agree. I think in my experience, our colleagues at Harold Washington have been on the forefront of where these students are and what their needs are. They're the gatekeepers in some senses, to this education in this urban setting. And so, being able to get together with them and learn from them has been invaluable. And it's also, certainly led us as we've shaped these programs. I think too, this is an iterative process. And so you try something, you analyze it to see what worked, and you figure out what you need to do for it to be better. And I think this is in some ways cutting edge work because we didn't see a lot. There's a lot of research on adult learners, particularly in the last 5 or so years, and it seems to be gaining momentum and traction in the public square, so to speak, as a conversation. But how to actually make this happen and how to impact the students that you're seeking, that's still in development. And so I think for us, we spent a lot of time, figuring out with the knowledge that we have what makes sense, trying it out, talking to students, balling it up, throwing it on the floor, and starting again, right? And I think that part of that is that's what happens when you're doing something that's new. And so as folks look to create their own programs, you'll have that same experience. No institutional factors are the same. And so even when we got together as a cohort with all the other recipients of this grant and in this project, everyone was doing something different. And we're all urban institutions in these, hotbed spaces, and we all did a different approach to this work. And when we would talk about our work with each other, we'd all say, oh, that's good. We'll take that piece here and see if we can add that here, but still, even as we, took pieces from what other folks were doing, we still have completely different programs and completely different projects. And so I think that was the other kind of aha moment. There's so many different ways to approach this work. And so figuring out what's the first challenge that you're hearing for this population on your campus, and then what steps you can take to ameliorate that challenge in your landscape is important. And then, of course, seeing what everybody else has done.
Excellent. Yes, no, I think everything that was said is really important. And it's you all have said this, but not as explicitly. So I'm just going to say too that it's really important to listen to our adult learners. We're talking about learning with, for, and from our adult learners. I think that's really important as well, and that's why it is so important, context to context, to understand what challenges are happening at your institution with this population, and how you all can best support it, giving resources or partnerships or whatever it may be. So I really appreciate you all kind of bringing that full circle and helping us understand a little more about your professional leadership and development program between both of your institutions. Before we close out, I just want to make sure that I share my immense gratitude for the work that you do. I know it's not easy. You spoke, Joe, I think Allen too, that sometimes this is an office of one or less sometimes. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, and know that it lives on through this podcast, as well as the work we're doing in PALS. So thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to episode 3 of the Adult Learner's Journey. My name's Jimmy McClellan, and we are closing out today. So have a good one.